Join me in welcoming the guys from Lupulin Exchange.
Thanks, Blake. I'm Jesse. I am one of the co-founders of the Lupulin Exchange. It's really a thrill to be here and especially to be up here. When we built the exchange 5 years ago, it was built for brewers to sell over contracted hops. We've grown a lot in the past 5 years, and we work with a lot of growers and merchants now. And I've met a lot of people over the last couple of days that I've known for 5 years, but I never knew what their faces looked like or who they were. So if you're one of those people that's had some contact with me or one of us over the last few years, please come up and say hi. I'd love to chat with you. So today, I'd like to show you some data from our perspective, and that is the perspective of the spot market. But I'd like to start with an unpleasant footnote in hop history. You might or might not remember this. This is an article that came out in Forbes almost exactly 2 years ago. Forbes isn't known for having their finger on the pulse of the hop industry, but I remember this sort of being the beginning of a current period of consternation that's lasted over the past 2 years until now about the state of the hop market. How are we doing? You know, and I think we can see that especially in the theme of this conference. So what's going on? Which way is the pendulum swinging? Is it swinging at all? I hope that today we can provide a few clues, at least. So the first thing that greets you when you come to the Lupulin Exchange is this big banner that tells you how many pounds of hops are for sale. When we started this business, we were really worried that people would come here and there would be 0 pounds of hops for sale. And early on, that was a very real reality. We never thought that there would be over 1 million pounds of hops sitting on the exchange waiting for a buyer. Just think about all of those thousands and thousands of boxes and coolers around the country patiently waiting for forever homes. But does this mean that we're long on hops in general as a community? Does it mean anything for the people in this room? Or maybe it's just indicative of a busy marketplace with 12,000 users and 1,000 sessions a day. So I would like to pop the hood and take a look at some data. So I'd like to show you highlights from 2 data sets today. The first is from our 2019 Lex Insights survey, which was completed by 470 brewers from within the Lupulin Exchange community. The second is market data generated by buyers and sellers, a lot of people like probably yourselves, over the past 5 years. So let's begin with the survey. Last year, we asked brewers within the Lex community to list the hop varieties they use regularly, and then to rank those in terms of importance. Not a lot of surprises here, really. Most of our top 10, you can see in the top 10 in acreage as released by the HDA. You can also see them on the BA's top 10 in production that was recently released in the New Brewer. One thing we did notice is that the proprietary varieties, like Citra and Mosaic, really seem to be dominating the more classic public varieties that defined the craft beer revolution. In fact, less than a third of the respondents to our survey reported using Cascade. It's also interesting to see Idaho 7 crack the top 10. This was the only variety that was not on either the HGA or the BA top 10 list. We're going to talk about Idaho 7 briefly again toward the end of this talk. So we also asked brewers to report their 2019 and 2020 position on the hops that they use in their breweries. Not surprisingly, people reported being a little short on Citra and Mosaic. On this scale, 1, a response of 1 is very short, 3 is balanced, and 5 is very long. And what we see is overall, while people are a little short on the proprietary varieties, is a lot of balance. People are basically saying, we're in pretty good shape. From what I read in the New Brewer, I think the BA survey found something somewhat similar. Of course, these means being right around 3 or balanced doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's balanced, right? You might have a lot of people long and a lot of people short and nobody in the middle. So we looked at the histograms, and yes, most people said we're doing well. We're balanced for 2019. We're balanced for 2020. Even for the very high demand proprietary brands like varieties like Citra, the most popular answer was always still balanced. So far so good. Maybe the market is in pretty good shape after all. We're also interested in how much our community is contracting these days. I think a lot of you are probably interested as well. So we asked them to report their percent of hops that they are planning to contract in 2020 and 2021, or did contract in 2018 and 2019. You might be surprised to find that our community members report contracting only about a third of their hops. About a third of our community also reports contracting no hops at all. Not surprisingly, we found a robust positive correlation between the number of barrels produced in a brewery and the percent of hops that they're contracting, right? So what we basically found is, at least within our community, within our sample, the larger brewers are continuing to contract, but we're seeing a lot of smaller brewers who are going to the spot market for all their needs. Okay, let's pump the brakes for a minute though, right? And let's think about these survey data. Can they be trusted? So this is, in my other life, as was just mentioned, I'm a social psychologist, right? So these are basically agreed upon statistical standards for sample size for a population, right? For our population of craft brewers, we can call it 10,000, right? If we include the Canadians and the Lupulin Exchange community does. To have basically the most lenient level of confidence, accepted confidence in our results, we need about 370 participants. So we barely passed muster here. However, these guidelines come with a very important assumption, and that is the assumption of random sampling. And in that case, we failed miserably, right? We did not randomly sample the brewing community. These are friends of Lex, basically, right? These are people who like us, probably who like the spot market, maybe who are doing well in their own business, so they're more likely to reply, or maybe they have more time to reply because they're not constantly fighting fires. Anyway, my point here is that self-reported survey data from a non-representative sample should be regarded with extreme caution, okay? So let's leave the perilous world of survey data and take a look at some market data. Okay, first a quick stop to frame the analysis we're going to use for the rest of this presentation. When you hear about gluts, oversupply, the most likely culprit is oil, right? So this is a graph of oil supply and oil prices over the past 43 years, since the year I was born, actually. The shaded areas represent times of glut, basically, when the supply is high, 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 and prices crash and are low, 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 right? We're basically in one right now because of all the fracking. In the oil business, the spot market is the primary indicator of supply and demand. I don't know if you know Bryn Kelly, but she's a leading energy trader. She's really smart. And she actually wrote last year that an inventory shortage or excess can be either perceived or real. Real inventory issues show up in the spot market. So let's look at our spot market. This is a graph of all the hops ever listed or sold on the exchange, as well as the average price for which they were sold. Let me orient you to this graph. On the left-hand y-axis is the pounds listed and pounds sold, and on the right axis is the average price per pound, right? So the orange line, maybe it's red, represents total pounds ordered per month. The blue line is listings created per month, and the gray line is the price, the average price that was paid for an order or a pound of hops on the Lupulin Exchange during that month. If you're wondering about that spike in November of 2017, that's what happens when Miller Coors drops 500,000 pounds of hops on the spot market at once. But if we're talking about gluts here, right? This looks okay. Yes, there is more supply than demand in that there's a lot more listings created than there are orders, right? But we're not seeing these dynamics of, a real increase in listings created or supply that's outpacing demand or orders over a short period of time. And more importantly, when we look at the price, we really don't see prices dropping over time, right? I mean, we see this kind of interesting U-shape, but in general, the prices that hops are selling for on our spot market have been fairly steady, at about $10 a pound, maybe a little more. But unlike oil, a single commodity, the hop market represents many varieties, right? Each with their own supply and demand profile. So we need to dig a bit deeper to figure out exactly what's going on. There's one thing I want to mention before we leave this slide, though. I don't know if you noticed what's going on here in the past few months. We see a simultaneous decline in pounds listed, pounds ordered, and price. This is actually a pretty rare economic phenomenon, and it typically indicates market malaise, overall slowdown, decline in consumer interest. Okay, let's look at Centennial, right? This hop was recently crowned the new #1 based on the BA survey, #1 in production. Again, on the left side, we see pounds listed per month. On the right y-axis, this is the average price per pound. The blue line is listings created per month. The red line is orders per month. And the gray line is the average price for a pound of Centennial over time. What we see here is more concerning, right? When we collapse across crop years, we see this troubling trend, increasing supply coupled with decreasing prices. In 2016, Centennial sold for about $10 a pound. In 2019, it's sold for about half that. There are currently over 200 listings for Centennial on the exchange. Most of them aren't moving. Does this look familiar? Right, I just showed it to you. So, high supply, low prices. It's not great news for the new #1. But wait, you might be thinking, doesn't collapsing across the crop years mash a lot of potentially important variability into one bucket? It does. So let's adopt a more sensitive perspective on the performance of Centennial over time. Okay, let me orient you to this new graph. You're going to see a few of these, and I'm going to move through them pretty quickly. On the y-axis is the average purchase price per pound, and on the x-axis is the months since a crop year of Centennial was released. Each of these lines represents a crop year. Okay, so the blue line represents the performance of 2016 Centennial over what you might call the prime of its life, the first 15 months. The red line represents 2017, the green line represents crop year 2018, and the yellow line represents crop year 2019. Early returns, right, what's happened between basically October and December for the latest crop year of Centennial. So we don't see quite as dramatic a downturn here, but again, the news isn't great. If you look at 2018, there's that sharp drop toward the end, where you can get Centennial for under $4 a pound. That's only about a year old, and this year, 2019 is not starting off great. It's starting off significantly lower than previous crop years. We could also think about Centennial in terms of how much of it was sold, right? So compared to how many pounds were listed on the exchange, how many pounds were purchased? For all the crop years, we see a relatively low amount of Centennial purchased. About 1/5 of the Centennial that's listed on the exchange is purchased. And again, remember, this isn't because it's an abandoned amusement park. We get about 1,000 sessions a day, hundreds of interested sellers. We send about 100,000 hop alerts every month that are sent out to notify people when a variety they're interested in has been listed. So again, not a great indicator. I'm going to move through these quickly because I'm really just trying to show you a trend here. There's a lot of information in these slides. I would be really happy to share it with you if you want to dig deeper. My email is at the end of this slideshow, or I think you can hit me up on the conference app. I'm not sure the messaging is working or not, or just come up and say hi. Anyway, Cascade, doing all right, but overall, sort of a similar pattern, right? Where we see 2018 trending a bit lower compared to 2016 and 2017. 2019 starting off fairly low. Cascade has been more consistent, though, than Centennial. And again, but when we look at the pounds sold as opposed to pounds listed, less than 1/5 of the Cascade that's been listed has been sold over the past 3 years. Chinook, similar story. Last year, there were 120,977 pounds of Chinook listed on the exchange, and less than 7,000 pounds of that sold. It's about 6%. And then the fourth of the four C's, right? The flavors that started a revolution. Columbus is actually doing a little better until recently. 2018 kind of had an upturn. Crop year 2017 sold a lot in 2018. But 2019, again, we're seeing this troubling trend at the beginning where per pound it's really selling lower than previous years. Okay? So you might be getting a little depressed right now, but it's going to get better. So let's turn the corner here. Okay? Citra, sexy beast. When we launched the exchange in 2014, in 2015, we had some controversy because some sellers were called out for charging exorbitant prices for Citra. We caught some flack for that as well. Our response was basically, the exchange is a free market. If it's too high, don't buy. And we were happy to see prices drop out of the stratosphere for crop year 2016 and 2017, right? So these red and blue lines here, I mean, this is actually fairly nice. You could get Citra for $15 a pound for a couple years ago. However, something crazy happened just last year. All of a sudden, the price of Citra went through the roof again. And in the middle of last summer, people were regularly paying $30 a pound for it. And this isn't like 88 pounds. This is like 8,000 pounds. So that's interesting, right? And then 2019, we see it looks like the prices are following a similar trend to what they did in 2019. Who knows where we'll go? But certainly a very clearly different picture than the public varieties that I just showed you. Mosaic, another big winner, right, over the past couple of years. 2016 and 2017 saw a lot of stability. One thing you'll notice about these proprietaries is they really hold their value over time compared to the public varieties, which sort of tank after the first year, sell for a fraction of their original price. Look what happened in 2018. All of a sudden, you know, Mosaic is selling for $5 more per pound. And again, in the middle of the summer, people are paying $25 a pound for it. In 2019, again, we're starting off really strong. Simcoe, similar, 2018 trending up, 2019 trending up. Seems like there's a lot of demand among the drinkers in America for really lush, tropical, fruity beers, especially over the summer. And brewers are responding. Really can't blame them for that. Okay, so we might expect proprietary varieties to outperform the public varieties to a significant degree, right? It's not a surprise. So maybe these slides don't surprise you that much, but we're seeing a meaningful trend in these data, that the gap between proprietary varieties and public ones is getting wider, and it's happening quickly. So let me show you what I mean. So this is a graph of the performance of 6 crop year 2015 varieties over 2 years, okay? So Citra, Mosaic, and Simcoe are the 3 lines clustered at the top. Centennial, Cascade, and Chinook are clustered below, right? So we see some separation here. This was early on, the period I was telling you about before, when people were charging exorbitant prices for these proprietary varieties here at the beginning of 2016. But what we see is, you know, something that's pretty good to see, and that's the prices of those proprietary varieties came down fairly quickly across 2016. We also see a lot of variability, relatively high degree of variability with the public varieties. I'd like you to pay close attention to the public varieties in the next few slides, okay? I want you to compare the variability that you see amongst those 3 public varieties with the variability you see in the next few slides. It's tempting to just look at the proprietaries, I know. So this is the same graph for crop year 2016, right? So in 2016, how did 6 of the top varieties perform over time. We started seeing the proprietary varieties hold their value, okay? But they were selling for reasonable prices, and we saw the public varieties basically perform similarly, although there was less variability, right? You see those lines starting to wind around each other. And by 2018, we see very little difference in the price between those three public varieties. They're sort of starting to be treated like one bucket. 2017, this is when things kind of went off the rails, right, for the proprietary varieties. But let's start with the public varieties. You can see there's even less variability here amongst these, right? They're basically performing as one, and they're sliding quickly. You know, about a year out, you could get 2017 Centennial, Cascade, or Chinook for less than $5 a pound all day, no problem, right? On the same day, in August of last year, you could pay $25 a pound for 17 Citra. That day, 17 Cascade was available for $2 a pound. So what we're seeing here is the proprietary varieties really ramping up, right? The value of the proprietaries actually increased over the course of 2 years, right? 2017 Mosaic and Citra are more expensive at the end of 2019 than they were when they were released. And this is crop year 2018, right? This is just this last year. Look at what's happening with these public varieties, right? The values have basically merged into one. This move from differentiated to undifferentiated price competition is called commoditization, and it tends to be very bad for business. On the other hand, proprietary varieties are just doing great for the most part, right? No end in sight. Okay, so let's look at this interesting trend of a broadening gap between proprietary and public varieties from a different perspective. This is probably the most complicated graph I'll show you, so just give me one moment to explain it. This is the average difference in purchase price for proprietary and public varieties at 2 points in time for 4 crop years, right? So at the end of the first year that crop year 2015 was released, right? So if you're looking for, in 2016, if you bought some crop year 2015, if you bought a public variety, it was going to be about $6 cheaper than if you bought a proprietary variety, right? So maybe $8 versus $14, something like that. 2016, like the other slides I've shown you, was a very mellow year, right? Prices were good. But all of a sudden, the past couple of years, we start seeing this gap, the gap in price between public varieties and proprietary varieties go through the roof. So in 2018, if you wanted to buy crop year 2017, and you wanted to buy a proprietary variety, it was about $10 more per pound. 2 years out, it was about $13 more per pound on average. And for the most recent crop year, 2018, this past year, you're going to pay about $12 more per pound for a proprietary variety. So obviously the trend here we're looking at is that upward trend in the gap between proprietary and public varieties. So another way to look at this is the percent of proprietary and public varieties that sold by crop year, right? So of all the hops that were listed on the exchange, how many of them sold? For crop year 2015 and 2016, a little less than half of the proprietary varieties and about 20% of the public varieties. For 2017 and 2018, we see, I think, is a pretty disturbing trend, and that is less interest in purchasing the public varieties and a lot more interest in these proprietary varieties. And finally, this is a global graph, kind of a gestalt view of sold versus unsold hops over the past 5 years, right? The orange bars here represent the total number of pounds listed by variety that went unsold. Nearly 3 million pounds of the top 3 public varieties couldn't find homes, even at cut rate prices with hundreds of views from potential buyers. What's happening to all these pellets? It's a sobering thought for the hops that drove a revolution. One more quick perspective on supply and demand. This is our Hop Alert dashboard. When you register an account on the Lupulin Exchange, most people set up some alerts when they get an email if somebody lists hops they want, right? So another indicator of demand in our spot market is how many of these hop alerts are set up over time, right, for specific varieties. Let me mention that our community has been growing during this time, right? This is the number of registered accounts over 5 years. So right now we have just under 12,000 accounts. So as our community is growing, we would expect the number of hop alerts to be growing across the board too, right? Even in the face of some waning demand. That's not what we see. The public varieties on the left here, Centennial, Cascade, Columbus, and Chinook, this is trends over the last 3 years, right? So in all cases, over the past 3 years, hop alerts for the 4 public varieties have dropped off, sometimes quite precipitously. Where demand for public varieties has been consistent, sometimes even amping up a bit. Interestingly, what we're seeing now are some of these newer proprietary varieties sort of pop out onto the market. We saw the biggest change in terms of percentage of hop alerts in Idaho 7. Idaho 7 was released 5 years ago by Jackson Farms outside of Boise. It was their first proprietary, and it really seems to be breaking out on the market right now, right? 2016 and 2017, $12 a pound. 2018, you see a real difference here. People really getting interested in it. And 2019, prices are starting higher. And if you look at the amount sold, last year, crop year 2018, over 80% of the Idaho 7 that was listed was sold. So another proprietary variety that's doing really well, while a bunch of public varieties suffer. So the widening gap between public and proprietary varieties is just one potentially important trend that we as a community should be aware of. Are we saturated? Are we oversaturated? From the perspective of the top public varieties, I'd say yes. But the new varieties are thriving and in high demand. Again, this is just how things look from here in the spot market. Be interesting to know how they look from your perspective and how your data can inform us as a community and help us make better decisions. Now, with a view from the ground, the mind behind the Lupulin Exchange, Sean Price. He told me not to eat.
Okay, this is Mount Ida Reserve near Charlottesville, Virginia, just down the road from Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. It's where I brew beer these days. Mount Ida is a farm brewery, and most of my beers are made with 100% or very close to 100% estate-grown barley. But nobody here cares about barley, so let's talk about hops. You'll be pleased to know that we don't grow any hops at Mount Ida. I've grown enough hops in Virginia to know that probably nobody should grow hops in Virginia. But I do want to show you how many pounds per barrel I use at Mount Ida. You'll see why in just a second. So I held out as long as possible, but I finally started brewing hazy IPAs in late 2018. The first ones I brewed used a lot of hops. I made some pretty good beers even with some of the public varieties like Chinook and Columbus and Cascade. I tapped an Imperial Stout recently. That one clocked in at 3.1 pounds per barrel. More is not always better. These days, some of my newer hazy IPAs, with some process improvements, I'm brewing higher quality beers with fewer pounds per barrel. Hops are really good at taking all the credit, but don't forget that many of these tropical, juicy flavor compounds are yeast-derived. Pilsner, the true test of any brewer's skill, and one of my favorite beer styles. Mine comes in just under a pound per barrel. I also brew a wheat beer. It's not terribly different from the beer that Keith Villa made famous. Keith's presenting tomorrow, by the way, so definitely check that one out. My version uses a lot of lemon drop instead of orange peel. That said, is still not cracking the pound per barrel mark. Fest beer, that's our best seller at Mount Ida and another personal favorite beer style. Not a lot of hops in Fest beer. Anybody know what that is? Any guesses? Anybody? Nobody? That's right. I brewed my first hard seltzer. I did it. I never thought I'd be brewing a product like this. Never thought it. But customers demand it. And, I don't know what the grocery store shelves look like in your town, but in 2019, a whole lot of craft beer shelf space became hard seltzer shelf space at my grocery store. So maybe think twice about planting more hops this year. Anybody have a guess how many hops are in my seltzer, pound per barrel? We'll take a guess. Boom, there you go. It's not a big number. Just think about that. I think that's important. You might have seen this knucklehead throwing away tens of thousands of dollars of hops in the latest brewing industry guide. I remember being genuinely concerned that I wouldn't be able to find any hops to brew with way back in 2008, and here I am 11 years later on the other end of the hop roller coaster, overcontracted, pouring money down the drain. What does one do before it comes to humulus refuse? Well, you try to cut your losses, right? Yeah. And check out what it took to unload some of these varieties that I had contracted at $7 and $9 a pound. There's Centennial for $1.43, Chinook for $1.90. Ultimately, I couldn't even give this stuff away, so 2019 has some pretty healthy tax deductions. We did, by the way, sell all of our long positions of proprietary varieties quickly and at our contracted prices. As a brewer, I hate the hop roller coaster. I want to not get burned. I want to have access to the right hops at fair prices, and like a lot of other brewers, I'm starting to look more towards extracts and oils, products with longer shelf life. Hops have gotten a lot more complicated than when I first got into brewing almost 20 years ago. There's more varieties, there's more products. I don't have all the answers, but I do know that things are only going to get more complicated, and I know that leveraging data is the only way to handle that. It's the only way to handle that complexity and achieve balance in the industry. We at Loop Mill Exchange, we look forward to helping not just brewers, but everybody in this room leverage data to keep the hop supply chain in balance. Let us know how we can help you. Thank you.